Okay, Mary, we are live.
Hi, Tina.
Hi. Let me double check and let's see if we are for sure live. I'm going to close this up. Okay, Mary, I am not seeing a live record on my side. Are you seeing one?
Yes.
Oh, you are. Great.
Live.
Wonderful. Sometimes it shows on the guest spot and it doesn't show on my spot. So we have the Reverend Mary Moreno Richardson with us today. And Mary has spent her life's work, her last 30 years, really has been devoted to serving and healing those most vulnerable. And Mary has done some incredible work with, she's a substance abuse counselor. She's been a speaker for the National Black and Hispanic Caucus. She has a lot to bring to the table and a lot to teach us. And so, Mary, I want to welcome you.
Thank you, Tina. It's great to be here, and I'm so glad to be working with you on this important issue.
So, Mary, tell us a little bit about what you've been doing for the last 30 years.
Well, about 30 years ago, I began to work in different detention centers, and I felt a call to become a chaplain. And so I was able to serve all over the state of California in different detentions from LA County, San Diego County, San Francisco County jails. And I began to notice a pattern, and that was the destruction of the war on drugs and the war on cannabis that had on so many communities of color and the poor. I started to see how families were ripped apart. I started to see how children were lost. They couldn't find their parents anymore once they were separated from their parents because the mom was smoking a joint, got busted, and all of a sudden their lives were destroyed. And so I would see this through the foster care system. I would see this through mass incarcerations. I would see who was being incarcerated. And it was always the children of color, and it was always people of color and those who were most vulnerable, the poor. And so after that, I started becoming involved and curious about what was going on with the war on cannabis. And I became a member of different organizations, Clergy Against Prohibition, Drug Policy Alliance. And I really became an advocate to fight this insanity. We talk about the dangers of marijuana, and what I saw over and over and over again, it was more not the danger of the substance, but the danger of the laws against it. I mean, I'm a hypnotherapist, and so I understand the power of suggestion, and I understand the power of our subconscious minds. And, anytime we see that cannabis leaf, it triggers to everyone what that means to us, whether it's, marijuana, watch out, don't get in trouble, or those who use it may be, I'm going to get busted. So there's this really strong imagery that has been planted in our heads because of prohibition. And so I think what we really have to see is the other side of it. What are the positive things that cannabis has brought now that it's legalized and has been able to bring into our communities, just with CBD oils and things like that are wonderful for healing. I work as a hypnotherapist, and I specialize in trauma recovery. So I work with our veterans and first responders and victims of human trafficking and people who are traumatized. And we know the benefits of cannabis and how it can help. And yet it's been so demonized in our society.
So, Mary, with your work with those incarcerated, your work with the downtrodden, your work with some of the most violent of offenders, and I remember hearing you speak, this was a couple years ago or many years ago, around the link between alcohol and violence. And you had touched back to, you didn't see that same link with cannabis consumers. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I worked at Sonaseka many years ago, and I taught the court mandated classes for abusers. And so those who had violently abused their partner were sent to court mandated classes. And prior to the itinerary of the class, I would always ask everyone, there was 15 people in a class, and I'd say, okay, how many of you were under the influence of alcohol when you beat your partner? And at least 14 out of 15 hands would go up. And then I'd say, okay, I have another question for you. How many of you were under the influence of just cannabis when you beat your partner? And the response was amazing. First of all, they looked at me like I was crazy. And the response was, who fights when they're stoned, right? Who fights? It's a non-violent substance. And yet alcohol has been one of the most violent drugs that we have in our community, around domestic violence, around fights, around bar fights, whatever you want to, you can always know there's a bottle there. And yet we accept it. We hand out alcohol to our children in a chalice in church. So there's an understanding that somehow alcohol is acceptable. We've all accepted that. And yet we have demonized cannabis when there's so many wonderful things that can help our society and people and help us heal.
You talked a little bit about the work that you do with those suffering from PTSD. And I know that it's not just our military vets. I know your work with the sexually trafficked and other heartbreaking demographics as well. And you talk about how CBD, because you've mentioned this quite a few times, has really worked into the therapy, helping them transition off some of the pharmaceutical drugs that they're taking for their anxiety or their stress. I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Well, I think it's wonderful now because we're able to do so much more research on cannabis and see all the wonderful benefits. And there's so many people who come to me because they may have PTSD, they may be veterans from wars, and they're struggling with insomnia. And they've been given all kinds of heavy drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, and it's still not helping them sleep. And yet they're not being able to live healthy lives. And so I see these people suffering over years and years and years. And it's just wonderful to see what CBD and cannabis can do for them. And so I think we live in a society where now it's legal. We should be able to offer that to those who need it, our veterans. Number one, I think our veterans really should have that benefit.
And you're quite fascinating. I mean, I know, of course, you have given your life to the Lord. You're a retired Episcopal priest, and you're definitely grounded in that world. But yet you're also grounded in the holistic world of healing. I mean, I've heard you speak many times, and you always talk about the whole person, the whole body, the whole mind, the whole spirit. And you yourself are a hypnotherapist, and you really bring in that spirit, that mind. And can you talk about some of your holistic healing practices?
Sure. As a hypnotherapist, I've been practicing for over 30 years. And like I said, I specialize in trauma. And one of the things that we know, the subconscious mind, we work with the subconscious mind, which is 88% of our mind power. Everything is in the subconscious mind. Our fears are there, our dreams, our belief systems. And so with working with hypnosis, it's just such a wonderful opportunity. I believe it's like a doorway into our soul, working on a spiritual level, a mental level, and also a physical level. And it gives people the opportunity to heal so many of these traumas that they've gone through in life, whether it is through their dreams or whether it is through the belief systems that we've had over and over again since we were children. And it gives us an opportunity just to heal that part of our lives. And I just think that with the opportunity to continue to heal our lives, it's just we become able to enjoy our lives once more and get through that trauma.
What can you give us some examples? I know you can't mention names, but some stories of those that have suffered
I
that
had
you
a,
help?
I worked with a Vietnam veteran about 2 years ago who was probably in his late 70s and was in the army and had struggled so much with PTSD after he came home from Vietnam, and said he had never really had a good night's sleep. It was just full of nightmares and flashbacks. And so we worked and did some body energy work, and also used suggestions, positive suggestions with hypnosis. And I remember the next day he called me and he was in tears. He was just emotionally, and he says, that was the first night I slept completely. And it was just interesting how our body is able to hold on to things, but also able to heal itself and let go of what it doesn't need anymore, and vent out all of those awful, awful experiences that he went through in the war.
It's interesting that our body holds on to these things and are the driver, really, but yet we're not aware. So, how do we course correct when we're not aware of what's driving us?
Exactly. So many times we're trying to get away from it. You know, when we think about substance abuse for many people, how many people use any kind of whatever you use to medicate, whether it is drugs, alcohol, television, food, anything. It's like we're all human beings and we all have that need to self-medicate. And so I think with hypnosis, it gives us an opportunity to look within ourselves and see what behaviors we may want to change, and also just how powerful our minds are to receive information. And it gives you an understanding of how powerful your mind is and how you can have much more control of that subconscious mind of yours through dreams, through suggestions, through different exercises. And so if people who want to stop smoking, or people who want to just change a behavior, or people who come in with trauma, I've worked with a lot of victims of human trafficking. And you're going to hold that in your body. I mean, it's in your body, it's in your mind, it's in your spirit, and it's in your soul. And so be able to just peel away all that trauma, all that hurt, and be able to get back to the core, the soul of that person, and help them heal. It's such a powerful thing.
And when you say help them heal, it's like you've said before, it's like, you know, unraveling, peeling an onion, right? Because it's layers, and then we become more aware of really what we're thinking, because we've got those tapes that run that we don't even know about, those tapes that are running.
Right.
So,
We talk to ourselves something like 600 words per minute every day. From the moment we wake up in the morning, that's that chatter that you're talking about, the tapes running, right? And what it is, it's basically justifying who we are and what we are. And it could be justifying it by criticizing ourselves. It could be negative, you know. So those are the thoughts that we can learn to have so much more control of. And those are the thoughts that keep us in fear, keep us in trauma, or keep us sad or angry, whatever that negative energy can be. And so we're able to shift that because our minds are so powerful. We just need to understand how to use them.
one of the things you had said, I can't remember which talk you gave, or where you were, but it was another one of your poignant statements that kept in my brain. And that was that this stigma and propaganda and bullying that is being done against the cannabis consumer, still, even though it's legal, that's criticizing this person for using whole plant medicine or using cannabis for whatever they would, it could be anxiety or sleep or pain. But that criticism again adds to a person's lower esteem, challenges, again, adding to that talk that's going on. And I see that even locally with our cannabis community, because we have a small group of people that are very anti-cannabis and make some pretty derogatory remarks. And I know for myself, as a cannabis consumer, a cannabis patient, I have to work at not letting those negative comments into my brain.
Exactly. And I think that because we grew up in a society or in a world where cannabis was illegal and we all had to hide it. And so there was a part of it that you felt shame. It's almost like society made you had the scarlet letter of you were a user and you didn't want to get caught. That's the last thing you wanted to do was get caught because you would get in trouble. And so there was this shame that automatically comes attached to it. And I think now where it's legal, we're still working, we're still struggling to get rid of that mindset.
I think one of the other beautiful things that you bring to light I've heard you say as well is that life is hard. Life is hard for everybody. Sometimes life is harder for some, but this world that we're living in is not meant to be heaven. And you just touched a little bit back about we all find ways to medicate. If it's, that 3 cups of coffee in the morning, or that 10 miles of running that we need to do, or television or gaming. But what I really like that you say is that we're all this, it's all of us, and that life is hard, and it's okay for us to admit it. And it's okay for us to find healthy ways to get through this world. And that's, I know that that's been part of your platform for cannabis. And I just want you to elaborate on that, because I always love when you talk about that too.
Well, I think too that when we look around ourselves and we see the wonderful benefits already that we have in our community, in Santa Barbara community, just with the legalization. One of the things that I've always found interesting in a lot of these hearings where a lot of the anti-cannabis people keep bringing us to and addressing is that they're somehow thinking that our side doesn't have family values, that somehow because we support the cannabis industry that we don't have families, or that our families don't have value. And I find that insulting, because I know a lot of people who work in this industry, and they're some of the most wonderful people I've ever met. Our growers are our generations. They go back generations in Santa Barbara County. They've given so much. They're like the rock of our communities. These are people who have done so much already in our community, and yet they're growing an organic product for us here in our community. And it's amazing to me the negativity around this, that the misunderstanding around it. And I know as a religious person, we're called by God when it comes to this whole war on drugs. I believe that we've been called by God to be just, to be wise, and to be loving. And the war on cannabis is none of that. It's not just. We see who's put in jail. It's not wise. We're not using our tax money with all of these different hearings from the anti-cannabis community. It's such a waste of money. That is not wise. The wisdom would be wonderful for people to really research what cannabis can do for them. And it's not kind. Where's the compassion when we see so many people who benefit from cannabis on so many different levels? And if you're not sure about that, you can research it. There's no lack of research nowadays. And so I think that's really important for me. And, like I said, I've worked in many, many detention centers. I've worked on the issue of immigration. I've worked on the issue of the war on drugs and human trafficking. And it's interesting because those three just crash into each other. They just crash into each other when you really stop and think about it, what the war on drugs has created. Mass incarceration and all kinds of horrible disasters for our society. It's interesting to me because people worry about the children, and I get it. Nobody wants to see their children on any kind of drug or alcohol. No one wants that. But then again, we're saying, how are we going to protect our children? And one thing I can tell you is if you send me to the park with a 15-year-old girl, guess who's going to get the free joint? It's not going to be me. I'm not going to be offered that free joint by a dealer. And it's not going to be clean. Who knows what's inside there? And yet, how are we protecting our children by prohibition? We're not protecting our children. It's like keeping cannabis legal is one of the best things we can do for our society and for protecting our children and our family values.
Well, that's deep, Reverend Mary. You're right that by keeping us in prohibition, by continuously stigmatizing this plant, we are doing more harm to our children than bringing this plant into the light of legalization. And you touch a little bit about the philanthropic gives that come from this industry, because these are families. These are people that love our community. These are people that love this plant, that are farmers, and they want to give back. And I know that you have been a champion for this too, along with the myriad of causes that you support. And I'd like to hear about that. I'd like to hear about your work up in the North County, and how you feel that cannabis and the causes of need overlap.
I think right now we're seeing, just because of this big crisis we're having with the virus, many organizations are wondering where their funding is coming from. And we've been talking for quite a while that the revenues coming from cannabis were going to be something really, a real blessing. And it has been. It's been an incredible blessing for our county and continues. I think there was an article the other day that you posted on KopSun of the revenues coming into this county, which is really going to be saving so many of our nonprofits. So I think that every penny that we can get, I know up in North County, we're looking for different ideas of how to keep these programs running. And it breaks my heart to think that someone doesn't want to take the money that is being raised through the revenues, through the tax revenues, so that these programs can continue, because there's some kind of judgment that that money is coming from cannabis. But yet a lot of organizations will take the money from wineries or other alcohol businesses, and there's no qualms about it. So I find that interesting.
So you're, again, touching back to your decades of work in the drug and alcohol sector, and I so respect and honor you in everything that you always do. And you've said this before, that alcohol is far more dangerous than cannabis, but yet we as a society have grown to accept alcohol. And we know, I mean, it's going to take a while for cannabis to come out and be accepted. Where do you, if you can project out for the next 5 years or 10 years, where do you think this industry is going to go?
Well, I hope that it continues to grow as it is, and I hope that the community opens up their opens up their heart and opens up their arms and sees what a blessing this is. I can see so many benefits. I mean, just look at employment. How many people are employed in our community because of cannabis, and well employed, being paid a sound salary, being given benefits. It's amazing what they're doing for our community. And in 5 years, I'd just like to see this continue, and to people to just accept and see, become more united around this and how we can all work together instead of trying to find ways to sabotage it. I just don't understand that mentality. I know I've gone to a lot of hearings and the other side gets up and they said, oh, the smell. And I don't get that. I just don't get that. I mean, this is an organic product that we smell, and it is not hurting us. It's not like the pesticides that we've had all through this county. And that, again, it's a blessing that our farmers are growing something that's organic. So many times we forget our history. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson had hemp farms. Queen Victoria used cannabis for menstrual camps. I mean, it's in the history of the world, and it's just that we're still stuck in that reefer madness mentality. And I think that it would benefit us all to just do as much as much research as we can on the benefits, because this is not hurting us. This is something that can really, really help us. I believe that it's been the war on cannabis that has hurt us, that has brought so much violence into our streets. You know, my work in jails as a chaplain, I would see why people were incarcerated, and it was either mental health issues or drug and alcohol issues or violence. But I mean, it's like when you think about substance abuse users, it's like that's a mental, that's a health problem, not a criminal problem, but we have made it a criminal problem. In juvenile hall, I served as a chaplain at Central Juvenile Hall in East Los Angeles for about 8 years. And what I would say is how many children were arrested for the most ridiculous thing. I mean, if there were 5 kids at the 7-Eleven and maybe one of them had a joint in his pocket and a police officer shows up and finds that joint, all 5 of those kids go to juvenile hall. And so, and juvenile hall is really just a boot camp for gangs, because if you don't join a gang within those few weeks, all the gangs will get you. So it's so sad how that system just works against society and against the poor.
Oh, Mary, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Is there anything that you would like to say? You would like to?
I just wanted to end with that. You know, sometimes our perception of the problem is the problem. And if we could, you know, shift our perception of what, you know, we have that reefer madness mentality, and we just shift it, that we might be able to see all the wonderful benefits. And I always love to end by saying, Jesus may have changed water into wine, but God created cannabis. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Reverend Mary, and keep up the good work. We are so blessed to have you in our community and helping those that need it the most.
Thank you.
Light.
Well.